Welcome, everybody, to A Little Perspective. My name is Pranav, and this is Nikhil. Today, we had the opportunity to have an amazing conversation with John Bailey, the CEO of Regina Food Bank, a nonprofit community based organization dedicated in addressing food insecurity by providing nutritious food, support programs, and educational resources.
His ideologies for a tight knit community and his vision for Food Bank is truly inspiring. John is an exceptional leader with a strong sense and pride in his community. I hope after listening to today's conversation, you all leave with a little perspective.
Well, welcome, everybody, to A Little Perspective. Today, we have a very special guest, John Bailey. Morning, John. How are you today?
Morning. Good today. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah, so far so good. Rocky start, but so far so good.
So we get a podcast rolling just for our audience members, just so you can give like a little introduction about yourself, and then we kind of get into the podcast.
Okay. Well, I'm John Bailey. I'm the CEO of the Regina Food Bank. Usually the voice isn't quite so smoky, sort of getting over a little bit laryngitis today, but I've been with the food bank for about 5 years. Prior to that, I spent some time in the private sector and then sort of started out my career journey with the YMCA here in Regina. So sort of bounced back and forth between nonprofit and private sector. Live at home here with my wife and 2 daughters who keep me super busy, but they're at the good age where they're almost independent, but they don't need to borrow the car yet. So that's kind of a sweet spot.
Right.
And have sort of spent, with the exception of a little bit of time spent in Southern Ontario, spent my entire life here in Regina. So it's a place that's sort of near and dear to me, and that's where we choose to sort of set up shop and make our home. So
That's awesome, man. So when you mentioned you were in private and then not-for-profit, why the switch?
I think there's a couple reasons for that. I think it's important for folks, especially when you can early in your career, to sort of test a lot of things out. The nonprofit sector sort of offers, especially early career folks, a lot of opportunity to try different things. So you don't get the scale that maybe you do in the private sector, but what you get to do is put your fingerprints on a lot of different projects. And then honestly, I finished my MBA from the Levine School here in Regina, and just decided it was time for a switch. Really enjoyed my time in the private sector, but when a recruiter phoned to sort of talk about the opening at the food bank, I initially was kind of skeptical, but decided to throw my hat in the ring anyways. And then through that process, things sort of worked out. And fast forward 5 years from that, and here we are sitting here talking about my journey and that kind of stuff. So it's just sort of like it's to me, it's about not forcing things. Like just sort of go like, no, like your path will get laid out for you if you're willing to put in the work and really willing to put yourself out there, because it does take work, and it does take some trade-offs here and there, but you'll find your spot eventually.
So I've got a question for you. Like, you've done an MBA from the University of Regina, and there's a lot of students who graduate from university and they just want to go there to make money, right? Yeah. You went into the not-for-profit sector and you knew like there won't be a lot of monetary value in it.
Yeah.
What was your motive? Like, were you always into serving people? Was that your part of your culture?
Yeah, I think sort of being in service to others is really important. One thing I always like to say is I've been brought up in a world of a lot of privilege. My kids are being brought up in a world of a lot of privilege. I don't think that's a bad thing unless you don't use it for the betterment of others. Like, you have to leverage that privilege to make the world a better place for those who don't have the same essentially luck as you do. I also think there's a bit of a misnomer around sort of the value in the nonprofit sector in terms of your ability to make a living and live quite comfortably. Just like anything else, as you move up, your income goes up, your salary goes up, your expectation goes up. people in the nonprofit sector, yeah, they might take a little bit less money, but there's sort of like, there is that tipping point where over a certain point, money doesn't actually make you any happier. So you can eke out a quite comfortable living in the private sector, or you can do the same thing in the not-for-profit sector. You just have to be willing to work at it. And I think that's one of the things that people get a bad rep. And I think that it's really coming out of school. People say, well, I want it. It's like, no, like I'm not going to disclose salaries here, but like you can, for the Regina Food Bank, our starting salary. So somebody's like, no necessarily any education coming in off for not, you get a living wage, and then it goes up from there. So this idea of just like, oh no, you have to make minimum wage and do all this kind of stuff. That might be true some places, but not everywhere. So yeah, would I be making more money right now in the private sector? Maybe marginally. But would I enjoy the work I was doing? It could be. You can't prove a negative, but the impact we get to do in our community, the ability to be innovative, the responsibility, but also the opportunity of running an organization like the food bank provides a fulfillment that you wouldn't necessarily get working someplace else.
Right. And I just want to say thank you on like behalf of everybody in the city that you're doing such an amazing job, that what you're doing is basically feeding so many people, and you're making like one life better at a time. So I just want to say thank you for that to start off.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's like the best part, right? Like, I'll tell you like this video that I saw on Instagram once when you talked about privilege right now, that there was a video where two groups of kids were compared. One of them were like in the North America region, and the other one like in the Middle Eastern regions. I think this was pretty recent too because of like the wars and everything. And that's the whole point about like when you get that privilege, right? Like to use it for good. Because on one side, like the kids were like, they were asked like, what do you want to do when you grow up? He was like, I want to be a millionaire. I want to get a Lamborghini or something. On the other side of the kids, they were like, I just hope to get 2 meals a day, or I want to see my mom again. It just like puts life into perspective so much that if you have the ability, you have to help people out. And I don't think there's any better feeling than that, because you can just rest easy at the end of the night because you did something good, and somebody's, their belly's full because of you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And that's exactly right. I mean, the growth in the number of folks we've been able to serve is one of the things I'm most proud of. Mm-hmm. And I want to provide context. It's like, I'm not proud to live in a city of 220, 230,000 people where there's between 25 and 35,000 people at any given time who are food insecure. That's not something any of us should be proud of. I am proud, however, that in my 5 years at the food bank, we've gone from serving 8 to 10,000 of those people a year to 18 or 19,000 of them a year. I am proud of the fact that the quality of product we provide to them has gotten better and better and better. And I'm proud of the way we're innovating to try and provide more dignity, more empowerment, more sense of autonomy in the way we get them the food that we provide. So those are things we can be proud of, but ultimately the fact that we live in such disparity is troubling, and the fact that the numbers don't seem to be getting better. We talk about the food bank, and our food bank's 41 years old now. I'm 42. So if an organization that I'm leading is basically the same age as me, it's a permanent part of our community. It started out as a temporary solution. That was the intent. It is a permanent part. So we need to start treating it as such. We need to start planning in a way that sort of goes, no, we're here for the long haul, because even if we can shrink the need, even if we get the policy interventions, even if there's an economic spike, like all those things that happen, there's still going to be people in our community facing food insecurity. And there has to be an organization like the food bank, like many others that do good work in our community to help those people get the hand up they need to get that sort of basic need of food taken care of. And that's sort of that's the calling in it. And you're 100% right. Sometimes where you come from warps your sense of what the world looks like. But in that, when people have the opportunity to see things like the video you're talking about, to come volunteer and see that actually like what unites us is way stronger than what divides us, the folks we serve come from all parts of the city. They come from all types of background, from folks that have had legacy of historic trauma, of intergenerational oppression and issues, right down to folks that 3 months ago were eking it out, and then their mortgage rate came due, and all of a sudden they can't afford their house and food. And it's everywhere in between. And each and every one of those people deserves the quality and the dignity of sort of somebody going like, here, we've got your back, we'll help you out. And that's what we sort of try to do, because that's sort of what connects us. And that's the power to me of what we do. And that is the power of food as a connector. Like, you think of family meals, you think of meals with friends, like it's sort of like, that's where bonding and connection comes. And that's the power of food. And that's sort of what we try to make more available to the folks that are facing food insecurity.
You mentioned that you had gone from feeding 8,000 people to 18 and 20,000 people, which I think is a great jump, which is commendable. It must have taken a lot of help from a lot of people. You must have connected with people, right? And there's this guy called Simon Sinek, and he has this idea that people don't buy what you do, but why you do it. And I want to ask you, like, what's your why? Why did so many people connect with you?
I think there's a couple of things. The first reason people connect with us, and this was really apparent in actually the early days of the pandemic. So if you think about, there's like some stuff we did during the pandemic that was really great, and some stuff that we did during the pandemic that was, in retrospect, probably not so great. But one of the things that people saw was an actual physical embodiment of what it feels like to be food insecure, which was, you go to the grocery store, you don't know if you can get there, you don't know what hours, you're nervous going in because there's people and all this kind of stuff. And then it was compounded with empty shelves. Now, it didn't matter if you had the money to pay for stuff, there was nothing there as supply chains got muddled up. And I think that was a really stark reminder to people what it's like to be food insecure, to sort of go like, there should be an abundance. I'm used to an abundance, but when I go to actually get the food I need, it's not there. That's different than somebody who can't afford or has economic pressures that doesn't allow them to buy it. But it is sort of that first step. So I think that sort of opened a lot of people's eyes to it. I think the other thing that we do is talk about the connection, the power, and sort of talking about this idea that if you come to a food bank, something else has gone wrong in your life. You're not just hungry, like a system's broken down for you, a support network wasn't there that you needed, your life circumstances changed. You're not there because you're hungry, you're there because there's a series of things that brought you there. And I think articulating that to people makes it more real. Again, getting at that idea, like there's more that connects us than divides us. It's that you can sort of start putting yourself, instead of going like, oh, that person is lazy, they don't want to work, so they're going to go to the food bank. Well, yeah, it's easy to ignore the problem and marginalize and other the person who acts it. When you sort of go like, well, think about the things that went wrong for them. Well, all of a sudden it becomes a little bit easier. And then you tie that to the fact that when you come to a food bank, you're taking a proactive step. We talk about bootstrapping a lot in Western culture. There's like, pull yourself up. Well, that's what people coming to the food bank are doing. They're going, I need to take care of this need so that I can go on and face the next challenge, and hopefully break the cycle of food insecurity. So you start framing it up like that, as sort of like, this is actually a first step towards empowerment. This is a first step towards making things better in your situation. People, that resonates with people more so than sort of stigmatizing and othering folks, which allows you to dismiss it. So that's a big part of what we try to talk about. We also try to talk about this idea of how do we maintain relevancy in a world where everything's fighting for your attention. And we've worked hard to sort of not just explain our why, but keep our why present in people's minds. Because otherwise you get lost. Like, you can't not keep there, because we don't receive ongoing funding from the provincial government. We don't receive ongoing operational funding from the federal government. We don't receive ongoing funding from the municipal government. Like, we are funded by our community. So we need to be out there actively reminding folks that this is our why and hope. And so far we've been proven that our community is incredibly caring. They'll continue to support the folks who need that hand up. And that's sort of how we define that why, and really taking it away from this idea of like, it's your fault for using the food bank to you've made the right choice by accessing the food bank so you can get on and start tackling the challenges in your life. So that was the big shift for us. And that's why we do what we do. We have posters across our building sort of say like, you fed someone today. And that's a rallying cry for our team, because it's like, sometimes it's hard. It comes like it's nonstop. And like, we have folks who have been there the whole 5 years. We have a staff member who's been with us for 34 years.
Wow.
They've seen it all, and they go, there's been nothing like this. It's just that point. But you keep coming down to that like core why for our staff team is you fed someone today, and our core why for those who support us is like, you are a neighbor feeding a neighbor. And that is a powerful thing. And that becomes our why.
That's awesome. So, like how you mentioned right now, there's an employee who's been there for 34 years. If you had to describe it from his lens, from his eyes, in the 5 years that you've been here, what difference has he seen that he didn't for the, like, I'll do the shitty math, like 29 years that he saw, like,
yeah, well,
29 years ago.
You'd probably say it's occasionally torturous.
Yeah.
But I think what he would see is, well, one, he's a quiet guy, so he'd think it. We wouldn't necessarily say it, but he would talk a lot about how there's been a shift from why not to why. Because when I started, it wasn't that there was only X amount of people who needed food. It was sort of going like, oh, we think we can get this much food, so that's how many people we're going to serve. And the big shift we've had since I've been there is like, no, like, I don't care how much food we have. We'll go get more food. We'll fundraise, we'll food raise, we'll do it. We'll get more food. We want to keep opening up spots. And that I think has been the biggest difference. The other big difference is he is that old school, like, paperclip and some gum and an elastic, and we'll fix this thing. Which again comes down to this idea of like, that's exactly how you'd handle it. If you were a temporary solution, you wouldn't invest in any of that stuff. Whereas I go the other way. It's like, no, we're here for the long haul. Like, if we need more pallet racking in the warehouse, we'll go out and find a way to do it. And then that'll start a new problem, which is like, oh, we've now put an extra row up. Now we're on our forklifts to get up to the top. Okay, well, we have to buy a forklift. Like, just doing that kind of stuff, I think would be a big change. And that's one of the things that he's been most reluctant about, is sort of this idea of just like, no, like, we're not going to be extravagant. We're not making it rain for everything. But like, if there's critical things that are going to make us more effective and more efficient, we're going to invest in them because we're investing in the community impact we're making. So I think that would be sort of the two things. Like, I don't think that sort of sense of like, we need to feed the community, that wouldn't have changed from the founder to the next guy to me. That part wouldn't have changed. But this idea of like, no, we're not messing around with this sort of like temporary solution thing anymore. We're permanent. We're going to start investing like we're permanent. Has been probably the biggest change he's seen in the past 5 years.
So just so we have like an idea of how food bank is, like, how can a person who's not food insecure like us, how do we spread more awareness about food bank? Because there's a lot of people who are not aware in a way about food bank. How do we spread more awareness?
Well, I think there's a couple things. You can go to our website, which is reginafoodbank.ca, and there's a How Can I Help tab. And there's donating food, there's donating funds, there's donating your time, and then there's advocacy. And advocacy can take on really big, dramatic shows of marches and protests and rallies and signature campaigns, or it can be as simple as one-on-one interactions with friends and families. They both take a certain amount of courage, because when you're in a social group and you see something, it's sometimes harder to call it out than when you have a critical mass behind you. But it's how do you mobilize people? Well, you mobilize them one at a time. And eventually, it gets big enough, you have a cause. So it's like we talk about the policies we support and we push, and it's almost never have anything to do with food. Because again, people don't come to us because they're hungry. They come to us because something else has happened. So it could be about signing a petition for a fully funded Canadian disability benefit. That right there would lift 2,000 or 2,500 people in our city right now out of food insecurity, fully funded. Right? Because if you're a Canadian living with a disability and you rely on those social supports, you don't have enough money to pay rent and buy food. It can be things like access to safe, affordable childcare, because that allows a parent who's a primary childminder to enter the workforce, and that can lift them out of food insecurity. It can be a living wage. We now serve 18% of the folks we serve are people who are gainfully employed and can't make ends meet. So if you had a living wage and that was the baseline for everybody, we'd see a 17 or 18% reduction in need just like that. So those are the types of things you can do, because it doesn't have to be about food insecurity. Like it can be about what moves you to try and make the world a better place for those who are less fortunate, for those who are more vulnerable than you are. So that's sort of what I always say. It's like, there's great, but you know what? Like I don't need a ton of help connecting with suppliers. Like we can do that. I mean, if you have the number of somebody, I'll be happy to take it off your hands. 100%. But when we talk about advocacy, it isn't about the sort of short-term need for food. It's about how do we take that sort of pincer movement of serving more people every day, but then taking the long, hard work of making sure there's less people to serve, is really an important piece of the puzzle. And it's a piece of the puzzle that's sort of getting away from us because we are taxed and we are stretched to meet the rising demand. We've more than doubled the number of points of service we have in a year. I just got our latest sort of stats were rounded up as we cleaned up our year end. And we're a little over 204,000 points of service this year. When I started, we were 82,000.
Okay.
So you see in 5 years, while dealing with a pandemic, while dealing with all that kind of stuff, that type of growth, you're swimming hard to try and like keep ahead of the current, just doing that, let alone the other stuff you need to do to make sure the line gets shortened. And that's where I think really on the advocacy piece, that's where people can have the most impact. Just like find something that resonates with you and speak passionately and speak openly and speak often about it. And then we can affect change that way.
Right. You know, like when I see you, it reminds me of like this one question that, and not, it's like a question and a statement that people naturally fall into like two categories, like leaders and followers. And you seem like a person who was destined to be a leader and an excellent one at it too. How did that start? Was that like this role, this aura has been in you since like childhood? Or what changed?
That's an interesting question. I've been asked a lot of questions. I don't know if I've ever had that one before. You know, I'm not sure. I don't necessarily know there's a change. I mean, part of it is just, honestly, it's reps. Like it used to be that talking like this would wreck my sleep the night before. Like and then you just get enough reps where you just can start talking about it. I think there's a piece that sort of goes, it's less about an innate sort of ability and more about having the confidence to actually have strong beliefs loosely held, which sort of goes like it changes. Like you have a plan and a strategy. And one of the things that drives our staff nuts sometimes is I'm an incredibly strong believer, just like strategic discipline. So we're going to do what you do. You make decisions, but you don't chase everything. So with that, you become more and more concerned about, okay, are we stretching ourselves too thin? Because because we can, doesn't mean we should. Just because we should doesn't mean we can. You start looking the world through that lens, you start to blaze a path. So in that sense, like that's where I think a lot of, if I'm being self-reflective, a lot of the sort of leadership attributes come from is actually the ability to say no. That's a great idea, but we shouldn't do it, or we can't do it. And you start stacking those things up, and all of a sudden you have a point of view and a perspective. And if you have surround yourself with the right people, they're happy to do it. But I would sort of say, like, yeah, some people are leaders and followers. I almost wonder if it's a different sort of paradigm the way I look at it. And sort of like you have rock stars and you have superstars.
Yeah.
And a rock star is somebody who's just like, they're awesome at what they do. And they do day to day, and they do functional operational tasks, and they are critical to the work you do. But they don't want or have any aspiration to do the leading and the decision making. They just want to be like, put me on a task and I'm going to crush it. And they have superstars, and superstars want to grow and climb and figure that stuff out. And the world needs rock stars, and they need superstars. Our organization needs rock stars, and we need superstars. And that's sort of how I define it. So I would sort of always say, like, I was the person who always wanted to take on more. And by taking on more, you get burned sometimes, and you learn and you figure it out. But I don't necessarily know if there is something innate other than just sort of the sense of, in some cases, like misplaced confidence, to sort of go like, I'll do this. And you do that enough, you put your hand up enough, you start to develop the skills that people want to see, and you start to figure out how to express what you need to express. So yeah, I kind of danced around your question as I sort of go through.
That's good.
But I think it is really just reps, and I don't think at any point you consciously go through a journey going, like, I'm going to be a leader. I'm going to be people are going to follow me. It's like, if you do that, I think you probably alienate more people than you bring in.
Right.
Whereas if you go like, I have a capacity, I'm going to grow that capacity, I'm going to grow that skill set, and then I'm going to help people grow their own skill set and nurture their own set of skills. You eventually grow a group of folks that you know want to work with you, and then you can start to pick that out. So as you build your teams, as you build your groups, you know who's on board and who's not.
Right.
Sometimes you want to fool yourself one way or another, but but it's all reps.
Right.
And the reason I bring up the rock star superstar analogy is like, some folks just don't want those reps. Some people want and take a ton of fulfillment and can rest their head on the pillow easy at night, knowing that they crushed it at what they're doing, and that's what they want to do. And that's fantastic. And the world needs people like that. And some people want something different. And I would sort of fall into the category of somebody who wants something different, but I don't necessarily know if there's sort of a switch or a path to get there.
Right. And you know, like the reason why I also asked this, like, and I think you were here to like when John and I were talking. So John, like before everything started, he wanted to be like a professional basketball player, and then after that, he wanted to coach. So I feel like in some way, I feel like you always had that in you, right? Like you wanted to like, because you've taught so many like kids as well, like high school and like junior high and everybody. So you've always, like, in a way, like why I wanted to ask you that too is because like you've always had like that leadership going on, even subconsciously. No?
Yeah, maybe subconsciously. I will say I was a heck of a lot closer to being able to coach for a living than play for a living.
Okay.
So there is that. But yeah, I think there is part of that. But there's also like, and you don't really think about it, and like sort of like this idea that it actually sort of, I never thought of it until I heard Scott Galloway sort of say like this idea of like, well, what you need to do, like a true measure of sort of leadership and masculinity, is sort of like taking an interest in a kid who's not your own. And I never really thought about that, but then you sort of frame up, sort of going like, well, if that's a level and a measure of leadership, then I guess so. Cause I did, like, I coached high school for 15 years. And in that I would coach provincial teams in the summer, or I'd do I spend a week with the U of R, or a week here, a week there, doing sort of guest coaching kind of stints, like trying to soak it up and learn what I could. But at the end of the day, it was about working with these kids and sort of going. And one of the things that always stuck out to me was we'd have, like, some of the kids were great. They'd show up and go to school, that's whatever. Some of the kids wouldn't show up except for during the season, because you have to have a certain grade level and you have to have certain attendance to play the rules on the school rules. And I was not a teacher. I was an outside coach or whatever. And you'd get this pushback from teachers going like, well, why should he be allowed to play? He only shows up when the season's on. Like, he shouldn't. And I always push back with this idea of going like, so you're going to tell me the one thing that's getting the kid in your school so you actually have access to him, you're going to take away from him. That's your plan. And that's how you're going to grow a future citizen of the city, is by taking away the one thing that's connecting to school. Why can't you use the time, use the 4 months, 5 months that this team is buying you to engage that kid further? And that never had an answer. And that was always the worst part of it, sort of going like, these are people who are supposed to be molding young people. Like, I'm yelling at them and making them run and do all the stuff. And you're the ones who are supposed to be actually teaching these kids. And you're the ones going like, well, they shouldn't be here. And that always just struck me as like such a, like, if you want to talk about leadership, that always felt like anti-leadership. So like, it's like, how do you not grow? How do you not empower folks? And that was sort of one of the things. And again, like that's maybe not touching directly on what you talked about, but I think there is, maybe there was something in there, but it was never intentional about that. It was like, actually, it's why not? It's because I wasn't good enough to carry my love of the game any further as a player. So it's an opportunity to stay connected. And even people going like, well, it's great you're giving back. It's like, it wasn't about that. It was about being part of a team and being part of something you missed when you sort of stopped playing. And now you sort of look back, and to your point, like working with these former players, and I call them kids, even though they're like entering their 30s. So they're not kids anymore, but like working with these kids and watching them grow up and have families of their own and start businesses or work in whatever sector they're working in. You sort of go like, it is cool to watch that progression in them. And you sort of go like, and for some of them, a big part of the reason they got through high school is because they had to show up during the season. And I look back and I'm like, okay, that's good. Like that school perseverance piece is something I'm actually really proud of. Even though I didn't teach a lesson or hand out homework or anything like that, but it's just like the team that they were part of, that I was leading, was the reason they showed up, and it's a big part of the reason they graduated. That's something I take immense pride in.
You know, I'm just going to circle back to that leadership and that superstar idea. I love that idea, superstar and rock stars. We all grow up and we all have that one person, or could be like a few coaches, teachers, like our own superstars that we look up to. And like, you're such a great leader, right? You were a coach for a basketball team and they showed up because you, at the end of the day, like, because they look up to you. Was there any person that you looked up to growing up? Was it like a superstar for you?
Yeah, it's funny. Like there's a number of people, but the one story is I have an interesting family, because it sort of pushes from folks that are very much like egalitarian, socialist, deeply involved in labor movement, deeply involved. For example, my father lived on a kibbutz in the Ukraine for when he's at a university, and then I also have members of the family that are rampant capitalists and sort of work in that the whole way. So there's never a shortage of interesting dinner conversations when the uncles and aunts get together. But I would have been, I don't know, I'll say 10, 11. The age doesn't matter. Young, like preteen.
Yeah.
And it was a family reunion, and and my uncle was sitting there and talking with my other uncle who was like married, who's married to my aunt. So like, and they're talking about it, and they're sort of going like, oh, I had this to do, and I had to clean out the garage, and I sort of said, and because I'm a chirpy preteen, going like, well, it's your house. Why'd you have to clean up the garage? Or you didn't have to do that. And my uncle looks at me and goes like, the reason I had to clean out the garage is because if I didn't do it, it wasn't going to get done. And that sort of stuck with me forever. Is the idea of like, well, if you're not going to do it, it's not going to get done. So like, yeah, nobody's making you do anything. But if you don't do it, it doesn't get done. And that stuck with me for, well, to this day, 30 years later. So yeah, looking at folks like that, sort of going like, there's such an important life lesson in that. And he's a person to this day who I look up to. He's now retired, living the good life. His daughter, my cousin, is a doctor. Like, he sort of brought up kids who were successful. He's had a successful career. And he would be like that. And then on the other side, someone like my dad, who's just like spent his entire career in the nonprofit sector. And it's still to this day, I will walk into rooms and go, hey, you're Chris Bailey's son. And I go like, no, I'm not his son. He's my dad, but I'm not his son. But this idea of just like, he's been retired for 10, 15 years and there's still people talking about him, or how's he doing, or talking about the impact that he had here or there. And it's just sort of like, so I was really lucky to have folks like that I could sort of look up to, really close to home, and sort of allowed such an interesting yin and yang to sort of perspective on how to live your life, but always sort of living a life of purpose and of meaning, but taking two almost diametrically opposite approaches to finding that meaning. So those would be the two sort of names that come to mind when I think about that. And just like this idea of just like, sometimes you just got to get stuff done. And I think that sometimes is where people get tripped up. It's just like, it's not about making it perfect. It's not doing something because you want to do it. It's not because you're following your passion. Nobody's passion is cleaning out the garage, but it's got to get done. And like I said, that sort of stuck with me for forever since I heard it. So,
Right.
We had a guest, Jacqueline Tischer, and she's the founder of Hope's Home.
Yep.
And she said this one thing that really resonates with what you just said. So she said that whenever you're asking yourself that, why me? Ask yourself, why not you?
Yep.
Why not you clean the garage? Why not you pick up that garbage from the road? Why are you waiting for somebody else? Because at the end of the day, we all know what we want to do. We all know what our purpose is. We're just too passive to pick on that purpose.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. Passive or self-conscious or whatever, but there's something in the way of you doing that. And that's exactly right. Like, why not you is a perfect way of putting it.
Right. And like you said, like, that's what trips people up. And that doesn't just belong in just one aspect of your life. Like, we follow like this guy, David Goggins, and he says like this one thing that, like how people say like, oh, you don't understand what I'm going through, or you don't see the hardships that I'm facing. And David Goggins says like, for you to be great, I know exactly what you're going through. I went through the same thing. So like, he went from 300 pounds to 106 pounds within 3 months just to make the cut to get in the Navy SEALs. He knows what he needs to get done. It's only the matter of just doing it. Like how you mentioned too. You have all the tools. It's your mind that's blocking you. It's your mind that becomes like the biggest roadblock that's not allowing you to do it. It's like in the gym too. People are like, I've been there for 8 years. I haven't seen any progress. Well, you don't want it that bad. Because in the end, it's not that complicated. You just have to do it. You just have to show up every single day and do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. But I think there's also, we sometimes confuse results with process. And you sort of talk about, well, I come to the gym every day for 8 years. I'm not seeing progress. Instead, there's a mindset that goes like, actually, I should be celebrating. I come to the gym every day. I'm here. I'm showing up. I'm doing it. Because I think we get stuck in this binary of like, yes, no, like you can come in and do something and it turns out great, but your process is garbage. Well, now you can't replicate that. Or you come in and you don't have success. Something fails, it flops, it doesn't, but you know the steps, you know your process. You can identify what's going wrong. So as simple as a gym, like I've been going so you've shown the discipline to go to the gym every day for 8 years. First of all, celebrate that. That's an incredible impact. And then go, okay, I'm not seeing what I wanted to see. Well, what are you trying to see? Are you trying to be 0% body fat? Okay, that's fine. Like if that's your goal, but then where in your process is it breaking down? Because you're doing the right things. And some of it might be like, actually, I just don't have that body type. So I need to readjust my goals. But I do think we run into issues when we run into this binary of success or failure. And I think it becomes a barrier to folks sometimes, to be perfectly honest, where it's going like you said, I've been doing this all the time. Why can't I get what I want? It's sort of like, well, maybe what you're looking for is you're not getting, but look at all the other things you're doing. And that's what we talk about every day when we sort of discuss. And we've actually incorporated into our team charter at the food bank, sort of going like, we celebrate victories big and small. Because it's one thing for me to smile and try to have my eyes open when they take the picture at a check presentation. But there's 1,000 things that happen every day that need to be celebrated too. Because there's 1,000 things that happen every day that lead to somebody getting fed. And if you can build on those things and create momentum, you can make significant change. And it's really hard to disprove a negative. So like you're not getting the results you want, but what happens if you didn't come to the gym every day for 8 years? What would you look like then? How would you feel then? How would your mental, physical health be then? And that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. And there's nothing wrong with being aspirational. I think having goals, big, hairy, audacious goals, targets that make you nervous, those are critical. But you can't lose the fact that every step you take on that journey needs to be celebrated, because nothing's forcing you to make that step but you. And if you get off course, it's really important to know internal compass, writing it down, whatever it is, to get you back on track. Because just because you're walking doesn't mean you're walking in the right direction.
Right.
There's this book that I recently read called Atomic Habits. It's from James Clear, and he talks about this idea that it's even okay to not even having goals. Like if you want to he gave an example of like a cycling team, a British cycling team, and everyone has the same goal to win, right? But it's about your systems. What kind of systems do you have? So he gave a quote that you don't rise up to your goals, you fall down to your systems. And this idea about showing up every day, celebrating those small wins. I feel like we all have this idea that once I achieve this, then I'll be happy. But I think that'll keep going on and on and on again. You'll never be happy. Just be happy right now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because it turns from a goal to a scarcity mindset really quick. It's sort of like, well, that person's got it way better. Get to your point, like maybe they do, maybe they don't, but does that even matter? Right? Or that person's got it way worse. Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but does that matter? Are you happy? Are you content? Are you getting the garage cleaned, or are you sitting there and letting it pile up? Because those are your two options. That is when it becomes a binary. But if you're okay with it, then it doesn't matter. And I think that's one of the things that people find, because you're right. Like if you're chasing an award or a certain dollar figure for salary or whatever material thing, whatever status thing you're looking for, that's not about happiness. That's about consumption. And if that's the reason you're doing it, you're 100% right, because you can always consume more. There's always the next thing. It's you have a 350i and you want a 550i. well, why aren't you happy with the 350i? And if there's a reason, there's a reason. And that's for you to decide. But if it's just because there's something better out there, you're going to keep chasing because there's always going to be something better out there. But if you can actually understand what it takes to make you happy, it's not about the stuff you consume. And that's a real challenge. And that's one of the things that's getting harder and harder to disconnect from in an age of social media, in an age of you can always see people at their absolute peak pinnacle highlight and go, oh, that must be what their life's like. It's like, actually, no, that's a peak moment in their life.
Right.
And you're going to have a peak moment in your life too, but it's not every day. Because if every day is a peak, then you never actually get to enjoy anything.
Right. And you always get you good.
Sorry, just gonna say one thing. So Jim Carrey gave a commencement speech in, I think, Cambridge, and he gave this amazing quote. He said that, I wish all of you can achieve what I've achieved and realize that this won't make you happy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That's awesome. And like what Nikhil asked you before as well, like, who did you look up to and who was your hero technically? Or where did you get like these values from? I want to ask you now, you are a dad yourself. So what values are you passing down? Because, like everybody takes something from even like your father, your uncle, and they mold something that is them and then they pass it down. So what's your unique teachings to your daughters?
Well, time will tell how effective I'm being at this, but if I had to have a goal that they knew is that, one, I'll always have their back. So it might not be easy. There'll be times when I'm frustrated with them, they're frustrated with me. Like, that's part of life, but I'll always have their back. And I think that's really important for kids to know. The idea of that psychological safety, that secure attachment where they go, I don't need my dad, I don't need my mom to bulldoze every barrier in my way, but I know when I reach a barrier that I can't get over myself, they'll be there for me. So that's that sort of sense of security I want to impart on them. And then if I could teach them anything, is this, like, it goes back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, like winning the lottery and being born in Canada in a middle class to upper middle class house surrounded by family that's connected. You didn't do anything to earn that. So, but that's okay. You won the lottery. That's great. You now have to use that to make something better. And how you make it better is going to be up to you. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. I keep telling them, you got to be a doctor. You got to be a lawyer. They don't want to be doctors and lawyers. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. They want to be teachers. They want to be this. And it's like, that's great. But you gotta use the luck that you've had to make the world a better place. Because if you are born into that luck and think you've earned it, that's when things go wrong for you. That's when things go wrong for the community you live in, and that's when things go wrong for society. So there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that luck, but you have to do something with it. You have to leverage it to make your small community or your larger world a better place. So if I can impart that onto them, and for them to know that I've got their back, but I'm not knocking down walls for them, but I'll help them get around it, then I think those would be the two things that I hope that when they're sitting in this version of the chair 30 years from now, they'll be able to talk about how that happened.
Hopefully they'll say the same thing that everybody addresses me with, oh, are you John Bailey's daughter?
Yeah. Well, that wouldn't be too bad either.
That's awesome. So John, what are the future plans for Food Bank? I know like we talked about this in like our very first meeting as well. The combination of basketball, getting community tied up. So you probably have something stored up here that you want to see come into fruition. What are some plans?
Yeah.
What can we see?
So what we want to be is, let's talk about that, a hand up. Mm-hmm. So to be a hand up, you need to do a couple things. You need to empower people. You need to break institutional cycles. So what we're trying to do, and we're going to be launching this summer, is launching the largest sort of choice direct service provision food bank in Canada. So we purchased the building about a year and a half ago. It's almost fully renovated now. And in that building, it's going to be laid out very much like a grocery store in the footprint of a convenience store. So like it's not going to be your 100,000 square foot Sobeys or Superstore, but it's going to be 5,000, 6,000 square feet. And our goal with that is to give folks an experience in which they can actually pick the food they want and say no to the food they don't want. And with that comes a sense of empowerment. With that comes a sense of breaking that institutional cycle of here's a box thematically picked for you by somebody else, and you take it and you use what you can and not, to a point where like it's just like you or I going to the grocery store and going like, yeah, we'll have a shopping list and we have a budget. So it's not just like grab everything in a free-for-all, but like you sort of work through and you take what you want. You take what you need and you take what you can use. And at the end of it, we scan it all out. Your total is always zero, but we know what's getting picked and what's getting left behind. And we can gain an ability to provide a greater sense of empowerment, a greater sense of autonomy, and hopefully improve the level of dignity people feel in accessing the food bank. So that's one part. That's the sort of choice model piece. Connected to that is one of the big underlying issues of folks facing food insecurity is a sense of isolation. It happens all the time. So we've also secured from the city on lease, and it's $1 a year. So it's not like it's not a significant financial contribution, but for that $1 a year lease, we're going to put $200,000 to $300,000 worth of work into a lot and turn what was a dusty, unpaved lot into a half-court basketball, benches, shrubbery, a play structure, a place where a community can gather and intersect and become a third place. Because a food bank's not a third place. A food bank is a place where you go, you get your needs met, you hopefully get connected to some supports to change your situation, but it's not a place to hang out. It's not a place to connect and be there, because we have to make sure that we're serving a huge number of people a day. But a play structure, a park, a bench, that's a place where you can be a third place, and sort of that place. It's not home, it's not work, but it's that third place, and that's what we're hoping to build. Once we get that stood up and going, we hope within 18 months we'll be able to turn our existing location, which is more of a warehouse setup, and also into a choice model. And in the sense of what's old is new again, up until the 30s or 40s, you didn't shop in aisles in a grocery store. You picked your order and you handed it off to somebody and they fetched it for you and brought out a bag. Well, that's what we're going to do at Winnipeg Street. It'll be a little bit modernized, so it'll be on an iPad and you'll pick it up, but same base premise. You pick your order, we fulfill it, and away you go. And in doing that, we hope to continue to provide that empowerment, provide that dignity, but also create a greater sense of sustainability for our food bank. When I started, we spent about $90,000 a year on food. Our bill this year is going to be just shy of $1.2 million.
Wow.
And that's in addition to $13 million worth of food that we have donated, and we secure through donations. We want to make sure we're spending our effort getting the stuff that people want and can use, because there's nothing worse than forcing somebody to take something they can't use. It's actually, in some cases, worse than not having anything at all, because when you force something on somebody they can't use, they feel the burden not only to take it, but they're saddled with the fact that because they took it, somebody else who might have wanted it can't. So we want to alleviate that and make sure that we're able to be there. Because again, we're not talking about a temporary solution anymore. We're talking about how do we create a sustainable model for a food bank. And we hope that the numbers start to go down. And we hope that we can reduce our footprint. But we're going to grow to the size that we need to be to serve the needs of our community. And that's how we want to do it. And it's going to be hopefully, and by 2027, 50% of the food that's coming through there is going to be sourced locally. Local lentils, local oats, local carrots, onions. We're starting a project to grow our own lettuce, trying to make sure that the food we serve reflects the community we live in, but also is sustainable. So we're not flying stuff in that's in California, grown in Guatemala, flown to California for processing, up to BC and over across to us. And by the time we get it, it's near its end of shelf life. We want it to be as fresh and as local as possible. We're going to continue to co-pack as many ingredients as we can, and we're going to continue to work to make as many value-add products. We already have a proprietary soup that we're rolling out, made with lentils and made with oats, so all locally grown. We're going to grow that, and we're going to continue to refine and grow our footprint that way, because it's all well and good to give someone a can of soup. Can of soup to us can cost anywhere from $1 to $1.20. The homemade, including production, including transportation of goods, we can produce that same volume of soup for 45 cents a unit if we do it ourselves. And then we own all the means of production, which means we're never in competition with a grocery store. We're never in competition with anything. We can just sort of keep doing it ourselves. We control that. So that's the goal. More choice for the folks we serve and more control over our supply chain for ourselves to make sure we're meeting the needs and getting the product that people actually want and can use. And we're hoping to find out some pleasant surprises, but we're prepared to find out some not so happy truths, because it's entirely possible we've been spending money on the wrong stuff this whole time. But we want to discover that, because if we know that, then we can start switching our energy to providing the stuff that folks actually want and can use.
That's awesome. Yeah. The plan is so well detailed. That's insane.
But that's sort of part of it. Like you can't sort of just shoot in the dark.
No.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of build those things out.
Right.
And again, that sort of comes back to what we talked about strategic discipline.
Right.
There's a million things we could do, but what are we going to do? And there's projects that I am absolutely in love with that we have to put on a shelf because we don't have the capacity to do it. We don't have the burn rate from dollars. We don't have the human capacity to get it done. And that's tough, but you have to be able to do that. Otherwise, nothing gets done. Everything gets half started and nothing ever gets done.
Awesome. So towards the end of our podcast, what we do is we do like a rapid fire round. Okay. And Pranav's going to ask you 3 questions. I'm going to ask you 3 questions.
Okay.
And you just have to answer like in 1 word or 1 sentence. Just short and brief.
The biggest challenge of the podcast is trying to keep the order. Okay, I'll do my best.
You start. What's something you didn't value, but now you really, really do?
1 word. Geez, this is tough. Something I didn't used to value. No, I would say time.
What are you most grateful for in your life right now?
I would say family.
Okay, so John Bailey, the CEO of Food Bank, what's a favorite restaurant in Regina?
Favorite restaurant in Regina?
Everybody's listening.
I know. I don't want to make anybody mad. That is a great question.
Well, too bad they're going to be.
Yeah, exactly. Now you've actually stumped me.
There we go.
I don't know.
Look at that.
Problem is, like, I think of favorite restaurants all over the country and all over the world, but I can't think of one in Regina. Well, I'll say this just for my buddy Jason Drummond, Leopold's.
That's awesome.
At least Drum and Pinch will be happy with me.
That's awesome. So, if you could go back in time and give young John, a 20-year-old John, 1 piece of advice, what would that be?
Stop caring so much about what other people think about what you're doing.
That's solid.
You know, I heard this idea somewhere, probably in an Instagram reel, that in 200 years, everybody that you know or your relatives, everybody will be dead. So like, really, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Do what you want to do.
That's
Very
right.
dark.
No, but it's true. Like that understanding of like mortality is really important. It can be oppressive or it can be liberating. And again, coming down to choice, like it's how do you view it? And that's exactly it.
Always have a choice.
Yeah. It doesn't matter how great a job I do. At best, a building gets named after me, but nobody knows it's me. A street gets named after me. Nobody knows it's me. That's like the peak of your legacy. And that's not a given and not necessarily it's something that is a life goal. So you're 100% right. Within 3 generations, nobody knows who you are.
Yeah.
So don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
People think.
Yeah.
That's true.
If you could make one rule that everybody in this world had to follow, what would that be?
Stop looking for reasons that people are different than you. So the rule would be start looking for the commonality. Because I think that's the biggest problem. We're so one team versus the other. We're so my group versus your group that we don't even talk to each other in a lot of cases anymore. And we try to find the differences. And people heard me say this before, like, we all think we're unique snowflakes, but when we get on the ground, it's all just snow. And that's the important thing. Like, stop trying to find the difference. Like, be unique, be your own person. That's all important. But don't let that quest for differentiation make the person across from you an other.
Another time travel question. So if you could go back in time and have a conversation with one person, dead or alive, or not just time travel, like anybody in the world, like past, present, who would that person be?
I think I would go back. I think I'd probably go back and talk to my grandfather, because both my grandfathers died before I was born, so I never had a chance to meet them. So this is a twofer, so I'm cheating, but I'm going to say my grandfathers only because they came from such different backgrounds, but I see the impact they've had on their kids, my uncles and aunts, and then their kids, my cousins, and just sort of talk to them about like what was sort of like what we're doing here, like what was sort of like how you got here, like sort of like you had a life, you had this, you had your background, you had whatever, and it got to this point where you were able to do this, and your legacy are like, I'm part of your legacy. My daughters are part of your legacy, and my uncles and aunts are part of your legacy. How did you sort of go through life to create what I would sort of say is a positive legacy, and just talk to them about that kind of stuff? Because again, they both passed years before I was born, so I never had a chance to interact with them even before I could remember. They were gone. So those would be the people. So I cheated. Those are the two people I want to talk to.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you so much, John. Today, it's been such an inspiring podcast and such an inspiring conversation with you. And we can't thank you enough for, not just for this podcast, but what you're doing for Regina, for this community. And like I said this in the beginning, I just want to say thank you on behalf of everybody. And you know what you mentioned in the middle of the podcast, that people still come up to you and they're like, hey, I know your dad. How are you doing and everything? Something tells me that's going to happen to you for such a long time, because you're going to leave such a huge legacy.
Oh, thank you for that. And thank you for having me today. This was fun.
Yeah, 100%. Well, we'll see you soon.
So much.
Awesome. Thank you so much.